Sevastopol, Crimea. June 1942. A German officer emerges from his trench during a brief lull in the battle. He's confident, his position is well protected, and Soviet snipers in this sector have been eliminated. He's wrong. From 400 meters away, a 25-year-old Soviet woman named Lyudmila Pavlichenko watches him through her scope. She controls her breathing, calculates for wind and distance, and squeezes the trigger. One shot, one kill. Number 309. Over the next few weeks, Pavlichenko will add another confirmed kill to her record before being wounded and evacuated from Sevastopol. Her final tally: 309 confirmed kills, including 36 enemy snipers. This makes her the most successful female sniper in history. It makes her one of the most successful snipers, period, male or female, in any army, in any war. And yet, most people have never heard of her. This is the story of Lyudmila Pavlichenko, a 24-year-old history student who became a legend, a woman who killed more enemy soldiers than almost any other sniper in World War II, a person who met Eleanor Roosevelt, toured America as a Soviet hero, and then disappeared into obscurity. This is the story of the deadliest female sniper in history, and why you've probably never heard of her until now. To understand how Lyudmila Pavlichenko became history's deadliest female sniper, we need to understand who she was before the war. Lyudmila Mikhailovna Pavlichenko was born on July 12, 1916, in Bila Tserkva, a town south of Kiev in what was then the Russian Empire, later part of Soviet Ukraine. Her family was working class. Her father worked in a factory. Her mother was a teacher. They moved to Kiev when Lyudmila was young, seeking better opportunities in the city. From an early age, Lyudmila displayed characteristics that would later define her as a sniper. Competitiveness. She hated losing. Whether in school, sports, or games, she was intensely competitive and driven to excel. Stubbornness. Once she decided to do something, she was relentless. This quality would serve her well during the war, but also created conflicts with authority. Intelligence. She was an excellent student, particularly interested in history. She would eventually study history at Kiev University. Physical capability. She was athletic and strong, comfortable with physical challenges that other girls might avoid. The event that changed Lyudmila's life happened when she was 14 years old, around 1930. A neighborhood boy was bragging about his marksmanship at the local shooting club. Lyudmila, annoyed by his boasting and competitive by nature, insisted she could shoot just as well, even though she'd never touched a rifle. She joined the shooting club to prove her point. What started as a competitive gesture became a passion. Lyudmila discovered she had natural talent with a rifle. Her hand-eye coordination, her patience, her ability to control breathing and heartbeat, all combined to make her an exceptional shooter. Lyudmila's shooting took place within the context of Soviet militarization in the 1930s. The Soviet Union maintained extensive paramilitary training programs through organizations like WWII, Society for the Promotion of Aviation and Chemical Defense. These programs taught Soviet citizens military skills, including marksmanship, as part of the USSR's preparation for potential war. The Soviet approach to women in these programs was relatively progressive for the 1930s. While most nations restricted women to nursing or support roles, Soviet ideology theoretically supported gender equality. Women were encouraged to participate in military training, though actual combat roles remained rare. Lyudmila excelled in WWII shooting programs. By age 15, she had achieved marksman certification. By age 17, she had won multiple local competitions. By her early 20s, she was among the top shooters in Kiev, male or female. Despite her shooting prowess, Lyudmila's primary focus in her late teens and early 20s was education. She enrolled at Kiev University in 1937 to study history. She was particularly interested in Russian and Ukrainian history, with ambitions of becoming a historian or teacher. At university, she met and married Alexei Pavlichenko. Some sources suggest this was her second marriage, with an earlier brief marriage at age 16. She had a son, Rostislav, born around 1932. Timing of marriage and birth vary in sources due to Soviet record-keeping and Lyudmila's later reluctance to discuss personal matters. By 1941, Lyudmila was a 24-year-old history student, wife, and mother. She continued target shooting as a hobby, maintaining her competitive edge at the shooting range. She had no military training beyond the paramilitary WWII programs and no expectation that her shooting skills would ever be used in combat. The Soviet Union's official ideology of gender equality meant that, unlike most other nations, the USSR had a framework, however imperfectly implemented, for women taking active military roles. In practice, most Soviet women in military service before 1941 filled traditional roles: nurses, support staff, communication operators. But the ideological foundation existed for women to serve in combat if circumstances required it. This foundation would prove crucial when Germany invaded in June 1941, and the Soviet Union faced an existential crisis. On June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Over 3 million German troops, supported by thousands of tanks and aircraft, attacked along a front stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The invasion was a catastrophic surprise, despite intelligence warnings. Soviet forces were caught unprepared. Within weeks, German forces had advanced hundreds of kilometers, encircling and destroying entire Soviet armies. Kiev, where Lyudmila was studying, was directly in the path of the German advance. Lyudmila Pavlichenko later described her decision to volunteer for military service. When the war broke out, I was in my 4th year of university studying history. I could not sit idle. I went to the recruitment office, where I was initially rejected. They told me to become a nurse. I was offended. I told them I was a marksman and wanted to fight, not bandage wounds. This encapsulates several key aspects of Pavlichenko's personality: determination to fight. Unlike many women who volunteered for support roles, Pavlichenko specifically wanted combat. Offense at being dismissed. She took personally the suggestion that her gender should determine her role. Confidence in her abilities. She believed her marksmanship qualified her for combat, regardless of gender. Soviet military recruiters in June–July 1941 were skeptical of Pavlichenko's claims. A 24-year-old female university student claiming to be a marksman? It seemed unlikely. According to Pavlichenko's own account, she had to prove herself at a shooting range before the recruiters took her seriously. Once they saw her shoot, demonstrating accuracy that exceeded most male recruits, their attitude changed. She was assigned to the 25th Rifle Division as a sniper. Pavlichenko received brief additional training in military sniping techniques, which differed somewhat from competitive target shooting. Fieldcraft, camouflage, concealment, movement without detection, combat shooting, shooting under stress, in field conditions, at moving targets, range estimation, judging distances without instruments, weather reading, accounting for wind, humidity, temperature, target selection, prioritizing targets, officers, machine gunners, other snipers, observation, patient surveillance to identify targets, record keeping, documenting kills for confirmation. The training was rushed. The Soviet Union was fighting for survival and needed soldiers at the front immediately. But Pavlichenko's years of competitive shooting provided a foundation that brief military training could build upon. By August 1941, less than 2 months after the invasion, Pavlichenko was deployed to the front near Odessa. Lyudmila left behind her young son, around age 9, depending on birth year, with relatives. She left behind her studies, 1 year short of completing her history degree. She left behind any plans for a peaceful future. In interviews years later, she rarely discussed these personal sacrifices. When asked about leaving her son, she typically gave brief answers, suggesting that defending the motherland was paramount and personal considerations were secondary. This reflected both Soviet ideological expectations and Pavlichenko's own personality, intensely private about personal matters, unwilling to be seen as seeking sympathy, and genuinely believing that defeating the fascist invasion justified any sacrifice. At 24 years old, with minimal military training but exceptional marksmanship skills and fierce determination, Lyudmila Pavlichenko went to war. Lyudmila Pavlichenko's first combat deployment was to Odessa, a major port city on the Black Sea, in August 1941. By the time Pavlichenko arrived, Odessa was under siege. Romanian forces, allied with Germany, surrounded the city. Soviet forces, including the Coastal Army and Black Sea Fleet, defended it. The siege would last from August 5 to October 16, 1941. 73 days of intense fighting. Despite being outnumbered, Soviet forces conducted aggressive defense and counterattacks, inflicting heavy casualties on Romanian besiegers. Odessa's defense became a symbol of Soviet resistance. It was one of the few bright spots in the otherwise catastrophic summer and fall of 1941, when German forces were crushing Soviet armies across the front. Pavlichenko later described her first 2 kills near Odessa. Her accounts, given in various interviews over the years, varied slightly in details, but were consistent in the essential facts. She was positioned with other Soviet infantry in defensive trenches. Romanian forces were attacking across open ground. Officers ordered soldiers to fire at the advancing enemy. Pavlichenko took aim through her scope at a Romanian soldier approximately 200-300 meters away. She fired. The soldier dropped. She experienced immediate shock and nausea. Despite years of shooting at targets, shooting at a human being was psychologically different. She later said she felt physically ill after her first kill. But there was no time for reflection. The battle continued. Enemy soldiers kept advancing. Pavlichenko fired again. Another soldier fell. By the end of her first day of combat, she had 2 confirmed kills. She later reflected on this experience. I did not feel like a hero. I felt sick, but I understood this was war. Either I shot them, or they shot my comrades, my people, destroyed my country. After the first day, it became easier. Not easy, but easier. I learned to separate the target in my scope from the person with a family. I had to, or I couldn't function. Over the following days and weeks in Odessa, Pavlichenko established herself as an effective sniper. Her kill count grew steadily. 2 kills after 1 day, then 5, then 10, then 20. By the end of the Odessa defense, she would have approximately 100 confirmed kills. Pavlichenko's tactics during the Odessa period established patterns she'd follow throughout her combat service. Patience. She would observe enemy positions for hours, waiting for high-value targets, officers, machine gunners, other snipers. Discipline. She never took unnecessary shots that might reveal her position. Each shot had to count. Camouflage. She was meticulous about concealment, using natural terrain, constructed hides, and patience to remain undetected. Target priority. She prioritized targets that would have maximum impact. Enemy officers, disrupting command. Machine gunners, reducing enemy firepower. And other snipers, eliminating threats to Soviet troops. Movement. She rarely stayed in one position for extended periods. After taking several shots, she would relocate to avoid counter-sniper fire or artillery. Observation. Even when not actively hunting, she observed enemy patterns, noting routines, weaknesses, and opportunities for future engagement. The Soviet military system required confirmation of sniper kills. Unlike some other armies where snipers self-reported, Soviet snipers needed witnesses or physical evidence. Confirmation methods included another soldier observing the target fall, recovering identity documents from the body, photographic evidence, commander observation. This system meant Pavlichenko's 3009 confirmed kills represented a minimum. Her actual kills were likely higher, but only confirmed kills counted toward her official tally. As Pavlichenko's kill count grew in Odessa, she encountered mixed reactions from fellow soldiers. Respect. Many soldiers respected her effectiveness and were glad to have a skilled sniper supporting them. Skepticism. Some male soldiers doubted a woman could really be as effective as claimed. Some suspected her kill count was exaggerated for propaganda purposes. Resentment. A few soldiers resented the attention a woman sniper received, feeling that male snipers, with comparable records, were overlooked. Protection. Some male soldiers felt protective of Pavlichenko, which annoyed her. She didn't want protection. She wanted to be treated as an equal combatant. Pavlichenko's response to skepticism was typically blunt. "I'm here doing my job. If you doubt me, watch through binoculars next time I shoot." She had little patience for soldiers who treated her differently because of her gender. She wanted to be judged solely on her effectiveness as a sniper. Pavlichenko's daily life during the Odessa siege was grueling. Physical hardship, living in trenches, inadequate food, little sleep, constant danger from artillery and air attacks. Psychological stress. The constant alertness required of a sniper, knowing that a moment's inattention could mean death. Isolation. Snipers often worked alone or in pairs, separate from infantry units. This isolation was psychologically challenging. Moral weight. Unlike infantry who fired into masses of enemy troops, snipers killed specific individuals. The personal nature of sniper kills carried psychological weight. Gender-specific challenges. As one of very few women in combat roles, Pavlichenko faced additional challenges: lack of properly fitting uniforms and equipment, absence of basic sanitary facilities for women, and the social dynamics of being a woman among men in combat. She rarely complained about these challenges in interviews, typically dismissing questions about difficulties with responses like, "We were all suffering. My difficulties were no greater than anyone else's." On October 16, 1941, Soviet command ordered the evacuation of Odessa. The city couldn't be held without cutting off forces that were needed elsewhere. Over several nights, the Black Sea Fleet evacuated approximately 80,000 Soviet troops from Odessa to Sevastopol in Crimea. Pavlichenko was among those evacuated. She left Odessa with approximately 100 confirmed kills, an extraordinary achievement in just over 2 months of combat. But Sevastopol would prove even more challenging. After the evacuation from Odessa, Pavlichenko arrived in Sevastopol in late October 1941. She would fight there for the next 8 months, the defining period of her combat service. The Siege of Sevastopol, home to the Soviet Black Sea Fleet, was one of the most heavily fortified positions in the USSR. The city's defenses included concrete fortifications from the 19th century and Soviet-era coastal artillery batteries, underground facilities, and tunnels, natural defensive terrain, steep hills, limited approaches. German and Romanian forces besieged Sevastopol from October 1941 until July 1942. 250 days of relentless combat. The siege became one of the bloodiest battles of the Eastern Front. The fighting at Sevastopol was extraordinarily intense. Artillery. German forces bombarded Sevastopol with massive artillery, including the largest gun ever used in combat, the 800mm Schwerer Gustav railway gun. The bombardment was so intense that the ground shook constantly. Air attacks. The Luftwaffe conducted thousands of bombing sorties against Sevastopol. Ground assaults. German infantry repeatedly assaulted Soviet positions in brutal close-quarters fighting. Attrition. Both sides suffered enormous casualties. The battle consumed divisions. For a sniper, Sevastopol presented both opportunities and dangers. Opportunities. Static positions and predictable routines gave snipers time to study enemy patterns and plan shots. Dangers. Counter-snipers, artillery, air attacks, and the intensity of combat created constant mortal danger. Pavlichenko's kill count accelerated dramatically at Sevastopol. Over approximately 8 months, she added over 200 confirmed kills to the 100 she'd achieved at Odessa. Why the acceleration? Experience. By this point, Pavlichenko was a combat veteran with developed instincts and skills. Target-rich environment. The siege created numerous shooting opportunities. Duration. 8 months of nearly continuous combat provided extended opportunity. Recognition. Her growing reputation meant she was positioned where she could be most effective. Perhaps Pavlichenko's most notable achievements at Sevastopol were her duels with enemy snipers. Of her 309 total confirmed kills, 36 were enemy snipers. These counter-sniper engagements were among the most dangerous and difficult work a sniper could undertake. Why hunting enemy snipers was especially dangerous. Skilled opponents. Enemy snipers were trained, experienced, and equipped with quality rifles and optics. Patience required. A sniper duel might last hours or days, with both snipers hidden, waiting for the other to make a mistake. Mutual awareness. Both snipers knew the other was hunting them, creating intense psychological pressure. High stakes. Whoever made the first mistake died. Pavlichenko later recounted several notable duels with enemy snipers. 3-day duel. One of her most famous engagements was a 3-day duel with a German sniper who had reportedly killed several Soviet soldiers. The German sniper had established a well-concealed position that Soviet forces couldn't locate. He was killing soldiers who exposed themselves even briefly. Morale in the Soviet trenches was suffering. Pavlichenko was tasked with eliminating him. For 3 days, she observed the German sector, looking for any clue to his location. She used various tactics: dummy targets to draw fire, observation of bullet trajectories from his kills, study of terrain to identify likely hide positions, patient surveillance of any movement or reflection. On the 3rd day, the German sniper made a minute error, a brief glint of light off his scope as he shifted position. It lasted perhaps half a second. It was enough. Pavlichenko identified his position, waited for him to settle, then fired when he next exposed himself to shoot. 1 shot, 1 kill. Number 193, approximate. The record. Pavlichenko's 36 enemy sniper kills was extraordinary. Most snipers never engaged an enemy sniper. Those who did typically counted themselves fortunate to kill 1 or 2. Pavlichenko killed 36. This suggests several things. Exceptional skill. Only the most skilled snipers survived counter-sniper duels. Courage. Hunting enemy snipers required seeking out danger rather than avoiding it. Psychological strength. The mental stress of sniper duels was intense. Recognition by command. Her success meant she was regularly tasked with eliminating enemy snipers. Pavlichenko was wounded 4 times during the siege of Sevastopol. The most serious injury came in June 1942. Accounts vary on exact circumstances. Pavlichenko herself gave different details in different interviews. But the essentials are: during combat, mortar shrapnel struck Pavlichenko in the face. The injury was serious enough that she was briefly unconscious and evacuated for medical treatment. While recovering, her position came under artillery bombardment. Several soldiers in her unit were killed. She recovered from the facial wound, which left her with lifelong scarring, though not severe disfigurement. She returned to duty within days or weeks. By late June 1942, Sevastopol's situation was desperate. German forces were overwhelming the defenses. Soviet command began evacuating key personnel and as many troops as possible via submarine and ship. Pavlichenko was ordered to evacuate in late June or early July 1942. Her exact final kill count at the time of evacuation is disputed. Some sources say 309, her official final total. Some say she added a few more kills after official counting stopped. Some suggest the 309 was a rounded or symbolic number. What's certain is that by her evacuation, she was credited with over 300 confirmed kills, including 36 enemy snipers. Sevastopol fell to German forces on July 4, 1942. Of the roughly 118,000 Soviet troops who defended the city, only about 3,000 escaped. The rest were killed or captured. Pavlichenko was among the fortunate evacuees. At 25 years old, after approximately 1 year of combat, she was one of the most successful snipers in the Soviet military, and she would never fight in combat again. After her evacuation from Sevastopol in summer 1942, Lyudmila Pavlichenko's life changed dramatically. She transformed from frontline soldier to Soviet propaganda symbol. Why Pavlichenko? Soviet command had clear reasons for selecting Pavlichenko for propaganda duties. Extraordinary record. 309 confirmed kills made her newsworthy by any standard. Gender. A female sniper was unusual and challenged Western assumptions about women's roles. Articulate, Pavlichenko was educated, intelligent, and could speak effectively. Ideological symbol. She represented Soviet claims about gender equality and women's emancipation. Allied relations. In 1942, the Soviet Union was desperate for Western, especially American, support. Pavlichenko could help cultivate sympathy. Pavlichenko was promoted to lieutenant, some sources say senior lieutenant, and assigned to Soviet propaganda and international relations work. She was likely relieved at not returning to combat. She'd survived a year of brutal fighting and had been wounded multiple times. But she also chafed at being sidelined from the fighting while the war continued. In August 1942, Pavlichenko was selected as part of a Soviet youth delegation visiting the United States and Canada. The purpose was both diplomatic and propagandistic: strengthen the Soviet-American alliance, generate American public support for opening a second front in Europe, demonstrate Soviet military capability, and resolve challenge. Western stereotypes about the Soviet Union and communism. The delegation included several Soviet youth and military representatives, but Pavlichenko quickly became the star attraction. Pavlichenko arrived in America in August 1942. She was 25 years old, had limited English, and had spent the previous year in trenches being shot at. America in 1942 was wealthy beyond Soviet imagination, untouched by direct warfare. Deeply curious about their Soviet allies, somewhat skeptical of Soviet claims, Pavlichenko found America fascinating and frustrating in equal measure. American media's response to Pavlichenko revealed much about 1940s American attitudes toward women, war, and the Soviet Union. Fascination with her gender. American journalists couldn't get past Pavlichenko being a woman. Headlines included, "Girl Sniper Arrives," "Soviet Woman, Sniper Kills 309," "Pretty Girl Sniper." Many articles focused more on her appearance, clothing, and personal life than her military achievements. Questions about appearance. At press conferences, American reporters frequently asked about her makeup choices, her uniform style, whether she wore makeup in combat, her plans to wear fashionable American clothing. One reporter famously asked, "Do you use makeup at the front?" Pavlichenko's response, "There is no rule against it. But who has time to think of her shiny nose when a battle is going on? Another reporter asked if women were allowed to wear makeup in the Soviet military. Pavlichenko replied sarcastically, "I wear my uniform with honor. It has the Order of Lenin on it. It has been covered with blood in battle. It is plain to see that with American women, what is important is whether they wear silk underwear under their uniforms. What the uniform stands for, they have yet to learn." Skepticism about kill count. Many American journalists doubted Pavlichenko's 309 confirmed kills. Some suggested Soviet propaganda had inflated numbers. Others couldn't believe a woman capable of killing that many people. Pavlichenko was consistently frustrated by this skepticism. They asked me silly questions. "Miss Pavlichenko, do you use face powder?" It was very hard for me to understand. I am a soldier. I came to talk about war. They wanted to know about cosmetics. The most significant relationship Pavlichenko formed in America was with Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady. Eleanor Roosevelt was impressed by Pavlichenko. Unlike many Americans who saw Pavlichenko as a curiosity, Roosevelt saw her as a capable soldier and interesting person. Roosevelt invited Pavlichenko to stay at the White House, an extraordinary gesture that demonstrated respect and created propaganda value for both nations. The friendship. Pavlichenko and Roosevelt formed a genuine friendship despite language barriers and cultural differences. Roosevelt helped Pavlichenko navigate American society and media. Roosevelt defended Pavlichenko against sexist questioning from press. Pavlichenko appreciated being treated as an equal by a powerful woman. The two corresponded for years after Pavlichenko returned to the Soviet Union. Speaking tour. During her months in America, August-November 1942, Pavlichenko conducted an extensive speaking tour. Locations: New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco. Numerous smaller cities, audiences, labor unions, student groups, women's organizations, military gatherings, public rallies. Message: Pavlichenko's speeches typically covered several themes. Soviet sacrifice, emphasizing the enormous casualties Soviet people were suffering while fighting Germany. Need for second front, urging America to open a second front in Europe to relieve pressure on the Soviet Union. This wouldn't happen until D-Day in June 1944, nearly 2 years later. Women's capability, demonstrating that women could fight effectively, challenging American assumptions. Anti-fascism, portraying the war as an ideological struggle between fascism and freedom. Notable quote: one of Pavlichenko's most famous statements came during a speech in Chicago. "Gentlemen, I am 25 years old, and I have killed 309 fascist occupants by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" This direct challenge to American men, delivered by a young woman who'd killed hundreds of enemy soldiers, while American men, at that point, had seen limited combat, was shocking and effective. The line received enormous press coverage and became one of the most quoted statements of the Soviet propaganda tour. Woody Guthrie. During her American tour, Pavlichenko met folk singer Woody Guthrie, who was performing at many of the same leftist and labor events. Guthrie was fascinated by Pavlichenko and wrote a song about her. Miss Pavlichenko, later recorded as Woody Guthrie's Miss Pavlichenko. Lyrics included: "Miss Pavlichenko's well known to fame. Russia's your country. Fighting is your game. The world will always love you for all time to come. 309 fascist Nazis fell by your gun." The song became part of American folk music canon, keeping Pavlichenko's name alive in a specific subculture long after most Americans forgot her. Pavlichenko's American tour had mixed impact. Positive: generated sympathy for Soviet war effort, challenged American assumptions about women's capabilities. created personal connections between Soviet and American people, demonstrated Soviet military effectiveness. Negative. Some Americans were disturbed by Pavlichenko's matter-of-fact discussion of killing. Conservative Americans were suspicious of Soviet propaganda. The focus on gender often overshadowed military and diplomatic messages. Return to Soviet Union. Pavlichenko returned to the Soviet Union in late 1942. She had been away from combat for months and would never return to the front. After returning from America, Lyudmila Pavlichenko's life entered a new phase, war hero in peacetime, which brought its own challenges. Final war years, 1943 or 1945. Pavlichenko spent the remaining war years in non-combat roles. Training. She trained Soviet snipers, passing on techniques and lessons from combat. Propaganda. She continued appearing in Soviet propaganda materials and public events. Recovery. She dealt with physical and psychological after-effects of combat. Completing education. She returned to Kiev University and completed her history degree in 1945, which had been interrupted by war. Honors and recognition. Pavlichenko received numerous Soviet honors. Hero of the Soviet Union, the USSR's highest award, received twice. Some sources dispute this, definitely once, possibly twice. Order of Lenin. Twice. Gold Star Medal. Various campaign medals. These honors confirmed her status as one of the Soviet Union's most decorated combatants. Post-war life. After the war ended in May 1945, Pavlichenko faced the challenge of transitioning to peacetime life, a struggle common to many combat veterans. Career. Pavlichenko became a historian and researcher, working for the Soviet Navy's main staff. Her academic work focused on naval history, drawing on both her historical training and military experience. She also worked as a research assistant at Soviet Naval Headquarters, a position that utilized her historical expertise while maintaining connection to military service. Personal life. Pavlichenko's personal life remained somewhat mysterious due to her intense privacy about such matters. Marriage. Her first husband, or second, depending on sources, Alexei Pavlichenko, apparently died during the war or shortly after. Details are unclear. Second marriage. She married again after the war to a man whose name varies in sources. This marriage also ended. Divorce or death unclear. Son. Her son Rostislav grew up and had a career in the Soviet Union, though Pavlichenko rarely discussed him in public. Relationships. Some historians speculate Pavlichenko had romantic relationships that she never publicly acknowledged, but evidence is limited. Pavlichenko's reticence about personal matters was consistent throughout her life. When asked about relationships or family, she typically gave brief answers and redirected to professional topics. PTSD and alcohol. Like many combat veterans, Pavlichenko struggled with what we'd now recognize as PTSD. Nightmares. She reportedly suffered recurring nightmares about combat. Hypervigilance. She remained constantly alert, a common PTSD symptom. Emotional numbness. Some accounts suggest she struggled with emotional connection in peacetime. Alcohol. Some sources suggest Pavlichenko developed problematic drinking patterns, a common self-medication for PTSD, though this is disputed and evidence is limited. Soviet society provided little support for combat trauma. Veterans were expected to move on and contribute to building communism. Discussing psychological struggles was seen as weakness. Public appearances. Throughout the post-war decades, Pavlichenko made public appearances. Veterans events. She attended reunions and commemorations. Youth groups. She spoke to Soviet youth about patriotism and military service. International delegations. She occasionally represented the USSR at international events. Media interviews. she gave occasional interviews to Soviet media. In these appearances, she presented the official narrative: proud Soviet warrior, dedicated communist, example of Soviet women's emancipation. How much of this was genuine belief? How much was required performance in Soviet society? And how much was self-protection is impossible to know. Relationship with fame. Pavlichenko's relationship with her fame was complicated. Pride? She was clearly proud of her military service and accomplishments. Exploitation. She sometimes felt used by Soviet propaganda apparatus. Privacy. She valued privacy and resented invasive questions about personal matters. Legacy. She wanted to be remembered as a soldier, not as a curiosity because of her gender. In a 1974 interview, she stated, "I am thankful to have survived and to be able to tell people about my comrades who died defending our homeland. But I am not happy about having killed people. I sleep badly. I have nightmares. War is not glory. War is horror. I would prefer never to have been in that situation. But when fascists invaded my country, I had no choice." This rare admission of psychological cost contrasted with her typical public presentations, suggesting the private Pavlichenko differed significantly from her public persona. Relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt. Pavlichenko and Eleanor Roosevelt maintained correspondence and friendship after the war. When Roosevelt visited the Soviet Union in 1957, she specifically requested to meet Pavlichenko. The two had a reunion that both apparently valued. This friendship between an American First Lady and former sniper, a capitalist icon and Soviet hero, was unusual given Cold War tensions. That both women maintained it despite political pressures suggests genuine mutual respect. Roosevelt wrote about Pavlichenko in her autobiography, describing her as one of the most remarkable women I've ever met. Later years. As Pavlichenko aged, her health declined. Combat wounds, wartime stress, and difficult post-war life took their toll. She suffered various ailments, including effects of wartime facial wound, general health problems possibly related to combat stress, reported alcohol-related issues, disputed, depression, and psychological struggles. She became less active in public life during the 1960s-70s, making fewer appearances and living more quietly. Lyudmila Pavlichenko died on October 10, 1974, at age 58, in Moscow. The official cause of death was stroke, though some sources suggest contributing factors included alcohol and general poor health. She was buried in Moscow's WWII cemetery, a prestigious burial ground for Soviet heroes, artists, and leaders. Her grave became a pilgrimage site for veterans and military enthusiasts. In the Soviet Union, Pavlichenko's legacy was carefully curated. Hero narrative. She was presented as a model Soviet woman, educated, patriotic, capable, dedicated to communism. Gender equality symbol. Her story was used to demonstrate Soviet women's equality and contrast with Western women's supposedly limited roles. Military excellence. She exemplified Soviet military prowess and dedication. Anti-fascist fighter. She represented the Great Patriotic War's narrative as an existential struggle against fascism. This official narrative wasn't entirely false. Pavlichenko was genuinely all these things, but it was incomplete, omitting her struggles, complexities, and private doubts. In the West, Pavlichenko was largely forgotten after her 1942 American tour. Brief fame. She was famous in America for a few months in 1942. Quick forgetting. As the war continued and Cold War began, American interest in Soviet heroes evaporated. Folk music preservation. Woody Guthrie's song kept her name alive in folk music circles. Historical obscurity. For decades, most Westerners had never heard of her. Only in recent decades, With renewed interest in women's military history, has Western awareness of Pavlichenko increased? Why the obscurity? Several factors explain why Pavlichenko, despite extraordinary achievements, remained largely unknown outside the Soviet Union. Cold War. Soviet heroes were not celebrated in the West during Cold War. Gender. Female combatants were often excluded from mainstream military history. Nationalism. Military history tends to focus on one's own nation's heroes. Sniper ambivalence. Snipers, though militarily valuable, occupy morally ambiguous space in public consciousness. Their killing is too personal, too calculated, unlike the cleaner abstraction of artillery or bombing. Soviet propaganda. Western skepticism of Soviet propaganda led some to doubt Pavlichenko's achievements or dismiss them as exaggeration. To truly understand Pavlichenko's story, we need to understand what it meant to be a sniper, the psychological reality of this particular form of warfare. What makes snipers different? Snipers occupy a unique psychological space in warfare. Personal killing. Unlike infantry firing into masses or artillery lobbing shells at distant targets, snipers kill specific individuals they've observed, sometimes for hours or days. Through a scope, a sniper sees the target's face, their mannerisms, their humanness. This personal observation makes killing psychologically different and often more difficult than impersonal combat. Isolation. Snipers typically work alone or in pairs, separated from their units. This isolation increases psychological pressure, removes social support that helps soldiers cope, creates sense of operating outside normal military structure. Patience and stress. Snipers spend hours in uncomfortable positions, maintaining absolute stillness, waiting for the perfect shot. This combination of physical discomfort and mental alertness is exhausting. Moral ambiguity. Societies tend to view snipers with ambivalence, militarily, highly valued for effectiveness. Ethically, often seen as somehow less honorable than face-to-face combat. Legally, targeted for special treatment if captured. This moral ambiguity affects snipers psychologically, sometimes making them feel like they're doing necessary, but somehow shameful work. Pavlichenko's psychological reality. Pavlichenko's experience included all these factors, plus gender-specific elements. Initial shock. Her first kills caused physical illness and shock, a normal response that training can't fully prepare someone for. She had to consciously override empathy and moral inhibitions to function as a sniper. Psychological adaptation. Pavlichenko developed coping mechanisms, depersonalization. She learned to see targets as threats rather than people. This was necessary but came with long-term psychological costs. Compartmentalization. She separated her identity as a student, daughter, mother, from her identity as a killer. Ideological framework. Soviet ideology provided justification. She was killing fascist invaders, defending the motherland, protecting the Soviet people. Professional pride. She took pride in technical excellence, marksmanship, fieldcraft, tactical judgment, separate from the killing itself. Mission focus. She focused on military objectives rather than individual deaths. Cumulative effect. Killing 309 people, even enemy combatants, even in just war, has psychological consequences. Emotional numbing. Over time, killing became routine. This numbness was necessary for function, but represented psychological damage. Nightmares. Pavlichenko reportedly suffered nightmares for decades after the war. Hypervigilance. Combat. Veterans often remain constantly alert, unable to relax. Pavlichenko showed signs of this. Relationship difficulties. The psychological distance necessary to function as a sniper can make post-war intimacy difficult. Substance use. If reports of her alcohol issues are accurate, this represents classic self-medication for PTSD. Gender and sniping. Pavlichenko's gender added unique dimensions to her psychological experience. Violating gender norms. Even in officially gender-equal Soviet society, women killing violated deep cultural norms. Pavlichenko was doing something women weren't supposed to do. This created internal conflict between socialization and action. Post-war, it may have complicated her ability to resume normal female roles. Proving herself. Pavlichenko constantly had to prove her capability to skeptical male soldiers and commanders. This pressure was exhausting and psychologically taxing. Public scrutiny. Male snipers could remain relatively anonymous. Pavlichenko, as a propaganda figure, faced constant public scrutiny of her appearance, femininity, and personal life. This scrutiny made it harder to process combat trauma privately. Isolation. Within isolation, snipers are isolated from regular troops. Female snipers were additionally isolated. Few other women shared their experience. Pavlichenko had virtually no one who truly understood her situation. Soviet female snipers. Pavlichenko wasn't the only Soviet female sniper, though she was the most successful. Numbers. The Soviet Union trained approximately 2,000 female snipers during WWII. Of these, about 500 survived the war. Other notable snipers: Rosa Shanina, 59 confirmed kills, killed in action 1945 at age 20. Aliya Moldagulova, credited with around 90 kills, killed in action 1944 at age 20. Nina Lobkovskaya, around 89 confirmed kills, survived the war. Tatiana Baramzina, around 20 confirmed kills, tortured and executed by Germans after capture. Sisterhood. Female snipers often formed tight bonds with each other, recognizing that only they truly understood each other's experiences. Pavlichenko spoke positively about other female snipers in interviews, but also acknowledged the competitiveness and occasional tension among them. Comparative experiences. Female snipers shared common experiences. Skepticism from male soldiers. Initially respect, earned through performance. Difficulty with post-war adjustment. Society's ambivalence about women who'd killed post-traumatic stress. But individual experiences varied widely based on personality, units, combat intensity, and luck. The killing question. Interviewers often asked Pavlichenko how she felt about killing 309 people. Her answers evolved over time. During the war, 1942 to 1945, I am a soldier. They are fascist invaders. This is my duty. Midlife, 1950s, 1960s. I did what was necessary. I would do it again if my country needed me. But I am not proud of killing. I am proud of defending my homeland. Later life, 1970s. I have nightmares. I remember their faces. But they would have killed my comrades. Destroyed my country. What choice did I have? This evolution suggests Pavlichenko's understanding of her own experience deepened and became more complex over time. The moral question. Was Pavlichenko a hero or a killer? The answer is both. Hero. She defended her country against invasion. She saved countless Soviet lives by eliminating enemy soldiers. She demonstrated extraordinary skill and courage. She challenged gender limitations on a killer. She deliberately killed 309 human beings. Whatever the justification, each was someone's son, brother, husband, father. The psychological toll of killing is real, regardless of moral justification. Understanding Pavlichenko requires holding both truths simultaneously. She was a hero who killed, a killer who served her country, a woman who violated gender norms, a soldier who never escaped the war. Contemporary relevance. Pavlichenko's story remains relevant because it raises questions we still grapple with. Women in combat. Many nations still debate women's role in combat. Pavlichenko's record demonstrates women's capability. but also the psychological costs of combat that affect anyone regardless of gender. Sniper ethics. The ethics of sniping remain contested. Is targeting specific individuals more or less moral than indiscriminate firing or bombing? Combat trauma. We now recognize PTSD and combat trauma more than in Pavlichenko's time, but still struggle to support veterans adequately. Hero worship. We celebrate warriors while often failing to acknowledge their psychological wounds or provide adequate post-war care. Propaganda versus person. Pavlichenko was both a real person and a propaganda symbol. Disentangling the two remains challenging. 120. Conclusion: remembering Lyudmila. As we reach the end of this documentary, we return to the central question: why haven't most people heard of Lyudmila Pavlichenko? The obscurity, despite being the most successful female sniper in history, one of the most successful snipers period, a hero of the Soviet Union, someone who met Eleanor Roosevelt and toured America, someone who survived a year of brutal combat. Most people have never heard her name. Reasons for obscurity. 1. Cold War division. The Cold War created separate historical narratives. Soviet heroes weren't celebrated in the West, and vice versa. History became nationalistic. Americans learned about American heroes, Soviets about Soviet heroes, with little crossover. 2. Gender marginalization. Military history traditionally focused on male combatants. Women's military contributions were footnoted or ignored. Even today, military history remains male-dominated. Female combatants must fight twice, once in war, once in memory. 3. Soviet propaganda. Taint. Western skepticism of Soviet propaganda led some to dismiss or downplay Soviet achievements, including Pavlichenko's. Questions like, did she really kill 309? Or was that exaggerated for propaganda? Persisted despite evidence. 4. Sniper ambivalence. Societies treat snipers ambivalently. They're militarily valuable but morally uncomfortable. We prefer heroes who fit clean narratives. Snipers who kill deliberately, personally, calculatedly, complicate heroic narratives. 5. Complexity. Pavlichenko was complicated. Hero and killer. Victim and perpetrator. Feminist symbol and Soviet tool. Private person and public figure. Simple narratives dominate popular history. Complex figures get forgotten. 6. Limited English language sources. Much of Pavlichenko's story exists primarily in Russian sources. Western historians and audiences had limited access. Only recently have historians begun translating and analyzing Eastern Front personal accounts. Recent rediscovery. In the past 10 to 20 years, Pavlichenko has experienced renewed interest. Academic interest. Historians studying women in combat, Soviet military history, and the Eastern Front have rediscovered her story. Popular culture. Pavlichenko has appeared in documentaries, books, podcasts, online articles, social media posts. Feminist interest. Feminists have embraced Pavlichenko as an example of female capability in male-dominated fields. Gaming culture. Military video games featuring WWII have introduced new generations to famous snipers, including Pavlichenko. The complexity of legacy. How should we remember Lyudmila Pavlichenko? Not as simply a hero, too simplistic. Simply a killer, too reductive. Simply a feminist icon, appropriating her complexity. Simply a Soviet propaganda figure, denying her agency. But as a complex human being who found herself in extraordinary circumstances, responded with capability and courage, paid psychological costs for her actions, navigated impossible situations, represented both Soviet propaganda and genuine human experience. demonstrated women's capability, while also showing war's universal trauma. The lessons. Pavlichenko's story teaches several lessons. 1. Women's capability. Pavlichenko definitively proved women can perform in combat roles equal to or exceeding men. This shouldn't be surprising, but in 1941, it challenged assumptions. Her 309 confirmed kills aren't just a number, they're evidence. 2. War's psychological cost. Regardless of justification, combat damages everyone. Pavlichenko's post-war struggles demonstrate that even successful warriors bear invisible wounds. Modern understanding of PTSD validates what Pavlichenko experienced. 3. Propaganda versus reality. Pavlichenko was simultaneously a real person and a propaganda construct. Both are true. Understanding her requires acknowledging both. She genuinely killed 309 enemy soldiers. She also was used by Soviet propaganda. These don't contradict. 4. Historical complexity. Simple narratives, good guys and bad guys, heroes and villains, fail to capture reality. Pavlichenko was defending against Nazi invasion, morally justified, through deliberate killing, psychologically traumatic. Both truths matter. 5. Memory is political. Who we remember and how we remember them reveals our values and biases. Pavlichenko's obscurity reflects how we prioritize male over female contributions, Western over Eastern narratives, and simple over complex stories. Behind the numbers, 309 confirmed kills, 36 enemy snipers, 1 year of combat, hero of the Soviet Union, was a person. A young woman who wanted to study history and teach. A competitive person who joined a shooting club to prove a point. A patriot who volunteered when her country was invaded. A soldier who killed to protect her comrades and country. A veteran who struggled with nightmares and memories. A friend who maintained connection with Eleanor Roosevelt across ideological divides. A private person who valued dignity and resented being reduced to curiosity. A human being who lived 58 years, loved, suffered, achieved, and struggled. Was Lyudmila Pavlichenko the deadliest female sniper in history? Yes, by confirmed kills. Was she a hero? By most definitions, defending country against invasion, risking her life, saving comrades. Yes. Was she also a killer who bore psychological scars? Undoubtedly. Was she more than the sum of her kills? Absolutely. She was a historian, friend, mother, soldier, survivor. Should we remember her? Yes. Not because killing is admirable, but because her story is remarkable. Her capability challenges assumptions. Her complexity reflects war's reality. Her obscurity reveals our blind spots. Her humanity deserves acknowledgement. In 1942, when American journalists asked Lyudmila Pavlichenko trivial questions about makeup and fashion, she responded with a question of her own. "Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" That question remains relevant. How many remarkable stories, especially of women, especially from perspectives outside the Western mainstream, have we ignored because they don't fit comfortable narratives? Lyudmila Pavlichenko was the deadliest female sniper you've never heard of. Now you have heard of her. Her story is worth knowing, not to glorify war, not to celebrate killing, but to understand the full complexity of human experience in extraordinary circumstances. She was 24 years old when war interrupted her history studies. She spent 1 year in combat. She killed 309 enemy soldiers. She survived. She struggled. She lived to 58. She was a warrior, a killer, a hero, a victim, a survivor, a person. She was Lyudmila Pavlichenko, and this was her story.